They say a mother's love is unconditional, that no matter what, you always stand by your child. But what happens when the child you raised, the one you cherished and protected, turns into someone you no longer recognize? Someone who embodies everything you ever feared? This is the story of how I uncovered the terrifying truth about my son and how, in the midst of heartbreak, I found a way to heal both myself and the people I love. My name is Gwen, and I'm 50 years old. I used to believe that I knew everything there was to know about my son, Brody. I believed that the love and guidance I poured into raising him would ensure that he grew up to be a good man. But life doesn't always turn out the way we plan. Sometimes, the monsters we fear most are the ones we create ourselves. It all began when I was 22, freshly graduated from college and full of hope. Mark and I met during our sophomore year, and it wasn't long before we were inseparable. He was charming, funny, and had an infectious zest for life. We were the couple that everyone envied, young, in love, and certain that we had a bright future ahead of us. After graduation, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't part of our plan, but we were in love, and we believed that together we could handle anything. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who supported us. For a while, it felt like we were living a dream. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares. Shortly after we were married, Mark started to change. He became distant, irritable, and quick to anger. The man who had once been my best friend now looked at me with resentment in his eyes. The pregnancy, which I had hoped would bring us closer, seemed to drive a wedge between us. Mark would come home late, reeking of alcohol, and start yelling at me for ruining his life. He blamed me for trapping him, for taking away his freedom. I was scared, confused, and alone. As my belly grew, so did Mark's anger. He began drinking more heavily, staying out all night, and when he did come home, his words cut like knives. He would tell me that I was the reason he was miserable, that I had trapped him with a baby he never wanted. The more he drank, the more violent his words became. He never hit me, but the emotional abuse was just as damaging. I tried to make things work. I told myself that if I could just be a better wife, if I could just make him happy, everything would be okay. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Mark was spiraling out of control, and I was drowning along with him. The stress of living in that toxic environment took its toll on me. I became depressed, withdrawn, and I started to fear for the safety of my unborn child. One night, when I was 8 months pregnant, Mark came home drunker than usual. He stumbled into the house, yelling incoherently about something that had happened at work. I tried to calm him down, but he shoved me away, causing me to fall against the kitchen counter. I gasped as a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. That's when I realized that I couldn't stay any longer. I had to protect my baby. The next morning, while Mark was still passed out in bed, I packed a bag and left. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I had to get away. I went to my parents' house and they welcomed me with open arms. They had always suspected that something was wrong, but I had been too ashamed to admit it. Now, there was no hiding the truth. I filed for divorce the next day. The divorce was a long, painful process. Mark fought me every step of the way. He didn't want our son, Brody, but he refused to let me have him without a fight. The custody battle was vicious, with Mark accusing me of all sorts of things to make me look unfit as a mother. But I was determined to protect Brody from the man who had caused so much pain. After months of legal wrangling, I finally won full custody, and Mark disappeared from our lives. With Brody in my arms, I moved to a new state to start over. I found a job, and slowly, we began to build a life together. It wasn't easy, but Brody was my world, and I poured all my love and energy into raising him. He was a bright, sensitive child, full of curiosity and compassion. I vowed to give him the life I never had, a life free from fear and anger. As Brody grew, we became incredibly close. He was my little shadow, always by my side, and I cherished our bond. I worked hard to make sure he had everything he needed, and I was so proud of the young man he was becoming. Brody was thoughtful, kind, and had a natural talent for academics. He excelled in school, and I did everything I could to support his dreams. But as Brody entered his teenage years, I began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He started to pull away from me, spending more time alone in his room, and I could sense a growing anger inside him. At first, I chalked it up to typical teenage rebellion, but there was something more, something darker. I tried to reach out to him, to understand what was going on, but Brody had built walls around himself, and I couldn't get through. By the time Brody was ready to go to college, our relationship had become strained. He chose a school close to home, which relieved me, but there was a distance between us that I couldn't bridge. I told myself that it was just a phase, that once he found his footing in college, things would go back to normal. But deep down, I was worried. At college, Brody met Chelsea, a bright and beautiful girl who seemed to bring out the best in him. They started dating, and for a while, it seemed like Brody was happy again. Chelsea was everything you could want in a daughter-in-law, kind, thoughtful, and full of life. She and Brody were inseparable, and I hoped that their relationship would help heal whatever wounds Brody was carrying. After graduation, Brody and Chelsea got married. They moved into their own place, and Brody landed a good job that allowed Chelsea to stay home and pursue her passion for writing. They seemed happy, and I allowed myself to believe that everything was finally falling into place. I grew close to Chelsea, thinking of her as the daughter I never had. We would spend hours talking about books, life, and her dreams of becoming a published author. But then, things started to change. Chelsea became harder to reach, and when I did see her, she seemed distant and anxious. She was no longer the vibrant young woman I had come to love. I asked Brody about it, but he dismissed my concerns, saying that Chelsea was just stressed about her writing. I wanted to believe him, but something didn't feel right. One day, when Brody was away on a business trip, I decided to visit Chelsea unannounced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When she opened the door, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, her skin was pale, and there was a haunted look in her eyes. It was as if all the life had been drained out of her. My heart broke seeing her like that. "Chelsea, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with concern. She tried to smile, but it was forced. "I'm fine, Gwen." "Really?" But I wasn't convinced. "You don't look fine. Please, let me help you." "What's going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she finally broke down. "It's Brody," she whispered. "He's not the person you think he is." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Chelsea hesitated, then began to tell me everything. She told me how Brody had become controlling, how he monitored her every move, restricted her access to money, and isolated her from her friends and family. He had forced her to quit writing, saying it was a waste of time and money. Chelsea was trapped, living in fear and completely dependent on my son. I was stunned. This wasn't the Brody I had raised. How had I missed the signs? How had my son turned into someone so much like his father? The more Chelsea talked, the more I realized that Brody had inherited the darkness that had consumed Mark, a darkness that I had tried so hard to protect him from. And now it was destroying Chelsea. But there was something else, a secret that Chelsea had been carrying alone. After long conversations and painful admissions, she revealed that she was pregnant. She hadn't told Brody yet because she was terrified of how he would react. She was scared that the baby would bind her to him forever, trapping her in this cycle of abuse. I knew I had to act. I couldn't let Chelsea go through what I had endured. I promised her that I would help her, that I would do whatever it took to get her out of this situation. Together, we made a plan. I contacted a lawyer, a friend from my own divorce, and we started the process of filing for a protective order and preparing for a divorce. I also arranged for Chelsea to stay with me until we could get her somewhere safe. As we were putting our plan into motion, something unexpected happened. Brody came home early from his business trip. I was there when he walked through the door and saw me sitting with Chelsea. The look of betrayal and rage on his face was something I will never forget. He knew, in that moment, that his secrets were out. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. I stood up, trying to remain calm. "Brody, we need to talk." "About what? Why are you here?" "About you, about Chelsea, and about the baby." His face turned pale, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But then, something in him snapped. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're going to side with her over your own son?" he sneered. "After everything I've done for you?" I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "Brody, I love you, but what you've done is wrong. You've become someone I don't recognize, and I can't stand by and watch you destroy Chelsea's life or the life of your child." He shook his head, disbelief and fury mixing in his eyes. "You're making a mistake. You think you're helping her, but you're just ruining everything." "I'm saving her, Brody," I replied quietly. "And I'm hoping in the process to save you too." But Brody was beyond saving. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. That night, I didn't sleep. I was terrified of what he might do. And my worst fears were realized when I received a phone call from the police early the next morning. Brody had been arrested. He had gone on a rampage, breaking into Chelsea's bank account, draining it, and then driving drunk to confront one of her old friends. There had been a fight, and Brody had assaulted the man. Now, he was facing charges for assault, theft, and driving under the influence. As I sat in the police station, waiting to see my son, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This was my fault. I had failed as a mother, and now my son was lost to me, consumed by the same darkness that had destroyed his father. When Brody finally came out to see me, his face was bruised, and there was a wild, desperate look in his eyes. "Mom, you have to help me," he pleaded. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, but I couldn't help him. "Not this time. Brody," I said, my voice breaking, "I've always been there for you, but I can't support what you've become. You need to take responsibility for your actions." He stared at me, disbelief etched on his face. "You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing what's right," I whispered. "I'm choosing to break the cycle." As I walked away, I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I had lost my son, but I had gained a daughter. Chelsea and I moved forward together. We found a place for her to stay, away from the chaos, and I supported her through the pregnancy. It wasn't easy, but slowly, she began to heal. She even started writing again, finding solace in her words and her unborn child. When Chelsea's baby was born, I was there by her side. It was a beautiful, bittersweet moment. I had lost one family member, but gained another. Chelsea named her daughter Hope, a symbol of the future we were building together. Brody was sentenced to prison, and despite everything, I visit him when I can. I still love him, he's my son, after all, but I know that he has a long road ahead of him. I can only hope that one day, he'll find his way back to the light. As the months passed, Chelsea and I settled into a routine. Hope became the center of our world, and watching her grow filled us both with a sense of purpose and joy. Chelsea thrived as a mother, and her bond with Hope was unbreakable. She found strength in her daughter, and that strength gave her the courage to rebuild her life. Chelsea's writing took on a new depth, inspired by the trials she had faced and the love she had found in her daughter. She poured her heart into her stories, and soon, her work began to attract attention. She was offered a publishing deal, and her first book, a memoir about her journey, became a bestseller. It was a story of survival, of overcoming darkness, and finding light in the most unexpected places. But just as life seemed to be settling into a new normal, another unexpected twist shook our world. One afternoon, while Chelsea was at a book signing event, I received a phone call from the prison where Brody was being held. It was the warden, informing me that Brody had been involved in a fight and was seriously injured. He was in the hospital, and the situation was critical. My heart raced as I listened to the warden's words. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and betrayal, Brody was still my son. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him forever. I immediately rushed to the hospital, my mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. When I arrived, I found Brody lying in a hospital bed, his face bruised and battered. He was unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically, monitoring his vital signs. I felt a pang of guilt as I looked at him, realizing how much I had distanced myself from him in the past year. Yes, he had done terrible things, but he was still my child, and the thought of losing him tore me apart. The doctors told me that Brody had suffered a severe head injury and that his condition was critical. They couldn't say for certain if he would survive or if he would ever regain consciousness. The uncertainty was agonizing, and I spent every moment by his side, praying for a miracle. As I sat by Brody's bed, memories flooded my mind, memories of the sweet, innocent boy he once was. I remembered the way his eyes would light up when he saw me, the way he would hug me tightly and tell me that he loved me. I remembered how he used to draw me pictures and write me little notes, telling me that I was the best mom in the world. How had we ended up here? How had everything gone so wrong? I began to reflect on my own choices, on the ways I had tried to shield Brody from the darkness in our lives. Had I made the right decisions? Had I been too strict, too protective? Had I failed him by not addressing the pain he was carrying from an early age? The questions haunted me, and the guilt gnawed at my heart. Days turned into weeks, and Brody remained in a coma. Chelsea visited him too, bringing hope with her. She would sit by his bedside, holding hope in her arms, and talk to him softly, telling him about their daughter and the life they had built together. It was as if she believed that her words could reach him, that somehow, deep down, he could hear her and that her love would bring him back. As I watched Chelsea with Brody, I saw a woman who had been through hell and back, but had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever. Despite everything, she still cared for Brody. She still wanted him to get better, not for her sake, but for Hope's. She wanted their daughter to have a father, even if that father was flawed and broken. One evening, as I was sitting by Brody's bedside, I noticed something different. His hand, which had been limp for weeks, twitched slightly. My heart leaped in my chest. Could it be? Could Brody finally be waking up? I called for the nurse, and within minutes, the room was filled with doctors and medical staff. They ran tests, checked his vitals, and confirmed that Brody was beginning to show signs of consciousness. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few days, Brody slowly began to wake up. He was disoriented at first, confused and weak, but he was alive. The doctors said it would take time for him to fully recover, both physically and mentally, but they were hopeful that he would eventually regain most of his cognitive functions. When Brody was finally able to speak, the first words out of his mouth were, "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital, Brody," I said gently, fighting back tears. "You were hurt, but you're going to be okay." He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Mom? What happened? Why am I here?" I took a deep breath, unsure of how much he remembered or how much I should tell him. "You were in a fight, Brody. You've been unconscious for a while." His brow furrowed as he tried to piece together the fragments of his memory. "A fight? With who?" "It doesn't matter right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What matters is that you're awake and you're safe." Brody's eyes filled with tears, and he reached out for my hand. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I messed up so badly. I hurt so many people." I squeezed his hand, my heart breaking for the boy I had lost and the man who was now struggling to find his way back. "We all make mistakes, Brody. What's important is that you're here now, and you have a chance to make things right." As Brody began the long road to recovery, he had to face the consequences of his actions. He had lost everything, his freedom, his family, and the trust of those who loved him. But he was determined to make amends, to rebuild his life from the ground up. It wasn't easy, and there were days when he wanted to give up, but with the support of Chelsea and me, he slowly began to heal. Chelsea, despite everything, chose to forgive Brody. She didn't forget, and she didn't excuse his behavior, but she believed in the power of redemption. She believed that people could change, that they could learn from their mistakes and become better. And for Hope's sake, she wanted to give Brody a chance to be the father he had failed to be. The process of rebuilding their relationship was slow and painful. Brody had to earn back Chelsea's trust, and that took time. He attended therapy, both individually and with Chelsea, to address the deep-seated issues that had led him down the path of anger and control. He had to confront the darkness within himself, the legacy of his father's abuse, and the ways he had allowed that darkness to take hold of his own life. There were setbacks along the way, moments of doubt and fear, but there were also moments of hope and healing. Brody slowly began to rebuild his relationship with Chelsea, not as her husband, but as the father of their child. He learned to be patient, to listen, and to put Hope's needs above his own. It was a difficult journey, but with each passing day, Brody grew stronger, both as a person and as a father. Hope, who had been too young to understand the turmoil around her, became the glue that held them together. She was the light in their lives, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Her laughter, her innocence, and her love brought a sense of peace and joy that had been missing for so long. As Brody continued to heal, he found solace in helping others who had struggled with similar issues. He began volunteering at a local shelter for domestic abuse survivors, sharing his story and offering support to those who were trying to rebuild their lives. He found purpose in using his experiences to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. It was his way of giving back, of making amends for the pain he had caused. Over time, Brody and Chelsea developed a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to their daughter's well-being. They weren't together as a couple, but they co-parented Hope with love and dedication. They worked together to provide her with a stable, nurturing environment, free from the shadows of the past. And as for me, I found peace in knowing that I had done everything I could to protect my family and to break the cycle of abuse that had plagued our lives for so long. I had lost a son, but I had gained a daughter, and together, we had built a new life filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. In the end, our story is one of redemption, not just for Brody, but for all of us. It's a story of finding light in the darkness, of learning to forgive, and of discovering the strength to move forward, even when the road ahead seems impossible. We are not defined by our past, but by the choices we make in the present and the future we build together. Thank you for listening to our story. It's a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there is always a way back. And sometimes, the greatest love of all is the one that gives us the strength to let go, to forgive, and to begin again. This expanded version of the